The subtropical island of Madeira is located less than 400 miles off the western coast of Africa. For generations, the pearl of the Atlantic has been home to some of the most fiercely independent and industrious people. Living in small mountainside villages, they worked what little land there was, farming mostly in terraces. Thousands of acres of vineyards were started all over the island. Sugar cane and rum became the major export items in the early days. To celebrate a good harvest, each village would hold a small festa once a year on or nearby church property. In the early 20th century, Madeirans joined the immigration rush to America for the chance to work in the textile mills and factories of the big cities. New Bedford attracted more than its share and established Madeiran Portuguese as an important part of the city's population. But there was a problem. The Madeiran community grew homesick, and in 1915, 4 men gathered to plan what was to be the first festa. It was a small affair, sized to match what they remembered from their Madeiran home. 2012 has marked the 98th feast, and the excitement is building to the 100th in 2014. The focus is no longer totally religious in nature, nor is it a battle of the bands as it once was. But to satisfy the growing crowds and changing times, the feast now provides an authentic variety of Portuguese foods, Madeiran wine, and a venue where feast-goers meet with family and friends, some just to catch up on old times and what has been happening in the past year. This short program will bring you behind the scenes to witness some of the history and to see exactly how much effort goes into the production of such a mega event. It's very important to note that all of the men and women who produce this feast are volunteers. None are paid. To start, we were fortunate to interview some who remembered the earlier days of the feast.
My name is Gil Aguiar. I'm from Titusville, Florida.
My name is Natalie Aguiar. I'm from Titusville, Florida.
My name is Hilda Baptista Starkey, and I'm from New Bedford, Mass.
Hilda, let's start with you. You obviously have been coming to the feast for a number of years.
For years.
I want you to go back to your number one very first memory of this feast.
Very first memory of the feast was when it was right in front of the church, and the grounds aside of the church were decorated, and there were barracas, which are stands, and it was like a close family relationship. Everybody came to the feast. Everybody was Madeiran. That was the thing that everyone looked forward to.
What year are we talking about?
Oh, I don't know. Probably 32, 33, 34, 19.
Ever since then, you've been coming back.
Yes, to
and
the
you've
feast.
seen a lot of changes.
Many changes. They give many scholarships. They do a lot of things that are good for the community. We must say that. But
tell me about
the
your involvement with the museum.
With the museum, well, I've been working trying to. They want to remember some old names, and I can remember a lot of the nicknames, but we used many nicknames when I was a youngster, and not the real names. So I can call them by their nicknames, but I don't know their real names, to be truthful with you.
Now,
But,
who worked at the feast from your family?
my father worked at the feast starting in 1932, and until he died, that was the one big thing in his life, to work at the feast, because it reminded him of home, of Madeira. He came from Madeira and never forgot he came from there.
What town in Madeira?
Agua Pena in Santa Cruz. Okay, and my mother was Situ de Levadas in Santa Cruz also.
How
But
about
they,
other family members?
well, I had an uncle, Mr. Manuel Sol, that was very involved, and his son Manuel Sol was very involved, and 2 or 3 of his grandchildren were involved, and his other son Antonio Sol has been involved. And It's very nice to say now that my children are only Portuguese and they have been involved in the feast. Both of my sons have been involved, and now my grandson has been involved.
You must be very proud.
I'm very proud of him, yes.
I want to take you back to 1950s, 1960s, when some of our listeners remember the feast. And I want to ask you, number one, what was the feast like, and what was your best memory?
I think my best memory has always been the two Portuguese bands used to try to do each other out. One would tell a story, and then the next one would tell a story. And everybody would be listening to them and understanding what they were saying. I know that today it has changed, and many people don't understand.
Well, my early memories are, like Ilda said, right next to the church. Those were my favorite times, when everybody knew everybody, and it was different. But my involvement with the feast didn't start until after I married my husband, and that's how I got more involved with it. But yeah, a lot of good times. And I remember when these feast grounds were not like they were back then, where everything around here was a big hill and a lot of dirt and a lot of houses that are gone now.
I heard a lot of people talking about this rock. Was there a rock here of some kind?
There was a huge rock where kids used to come down and sled and just have good times. And kids
Where is
used
it now?
It's gone. I think the pavilion's right on it right now. They kind of blasted it out. But we used to sit here and watch. There was a group of men that had pigeon coops across the street, and we used to watch them send their pigeons with messages and stuff. It was quite interesting. But we were kids, and that was fun then.
Now, Ilda didn't mention this, but I'm going to ask you about the food back in the beginning days of the feast. What was the food like? Is it what we have today?
What I remember, and because we lived right down the street from the feast, we used to go home to eat. We never ate here. But what I remember is barbecue meat at night, where everybody would do that. And particularly, like she said, with the marching bands, and they would play one against the other and have the battle of the bands. That was, to me, one of the best features of the whole thing.
In the early feasts, was there a procession or a parade like we have now?
There was a small parade, not to the extent that they have now, but it was a small parade, and it was usually pretty much around the church, from what I remember.
It gets bigger every year. So
Every year. Every year.
tell me what you look forward to in the future. Because you're going to be around a long time.
God willing. What am I looking for the future? I would like to see more young men get involved, and I understand that there's a movement to have women for status, and I don't have a problem with that, but I kind of like that it was special for these men who come here and have a good time, and they just want to remember their heritage. They just want to remember Madeira, and that's what it's all about.
And they don't mind the work.
Most of them, I think most of these men really work hard. And I do mean hard, and I have a lot of respect for that. You know, and of course there's a few men that just want to sit around.
The pay is lousy.
I know, the pay is terrible. Yeah, you never brought home anything good.
Now, pass the mic over to your husband, Gilly. I have been here since 1982, was my first year. And I can recall seeing you every year. And you're either in the kitchen chopping garlic, or you're down at the meat stand chopping meat. You're everywhere, but you seem to be food-oriented.
Yeah, that's true. The last few years, I was working at stand with Joe Souza and all his family. They're cutting meat, with barbecue for barbecue sandwiches and stuff like that, So we, like I say, like he says, it's gone way out of proportion now. It's not the same like it was back in the 50s or the 40s. I was in the committee in '56, and it was entirely different. In those days, they were more dedicated because they had to pay for everything. They had to put a $50 bond, to serve. They had to pay for their uniforms. And I believe the women, if they did march, had to pay for their own clothes. And we had to go house to house collecting those days. So it's changed quite a few,
What's your best memory from the early days?
Well, the best memory probably is it's hard to say. I remember when it was up, like Hilda says, up there, and the battle of the bands. That's probably, we don't see that anymore. They cater to the young children, the kids, well, I call them kids. They're 20, 30s. They're still kids to me.
How about your friends that you served with back then? Those that,
Well, quite a few. The first year I was on the committee was in '56, so a lot of them passed away. It's hard to say. And like I say, as time's gone on, a lot of people that we known, worked with, have gone.
now you lived in Florida for most of the year. And
Right.
You come up here
Yeah.
especially to work at the feast and visit family?
Right. We left here in '67 to go to Connecticut. I worked in Connecticut, and then I went down to Florida. I've been down in Florida for 18 years now. So we've been coming up every year for the last 18 years, really.
And you
Well,
come up here because of the high pay. We pay you so much.
Oh, yes. We did well. We did 7,000 pounds of pork. And we were on piecework. I haven't seen a check yet.
It's in the mail.
And also, I got to tell you about the scholarship, though. I had four grandchildren already received scholarships, and they're out of college now. Well, I got one still in college. And so the scholarship has helped, And even though it's $1,000, it helps the kids. And I'm glad they're doing it for other children too. It doesn't have to be Madurans or they're helping the community.
Okay, does anyone else have anything they want to add?
Well, I just want to say, to me, the best thing that I look forward to is watching all the committee members and their wives walk into church. And I just think that's a sign of respect. And I just love those 10 minutes watching all these states walk into church as a unit. And I just think it's lovely. I really do. And that to me is the highlight of the whole thing.
That's great. Hilda, what about you?
I agree with what she's just said. I think maybe someday there will be a lot more thinking when they're just trying to do a parade and make it like they did years ago. It was a procession. It was not a parade. It didn't travel as far, but there was more meaning to it. I think a lot of the younger people don't have any idea what it was like before. And I think that's sad. I think it's kind of sad. But it's a different era, different people, and they're our product, really. Thank you.
We're here on an evening before the annual Feast of the Blessed Sacrament with Mike Canaster, who's the director of the folkloric group. Mike, we're filming the practice of the group. How many times do you practice before the feast?
Usually twice a week, one weekday and usually on Sunday if we're not away, but this coming week we're going to Martha's Vineyard, and the following weekend we're going to Wow, I can't even remember where we're going. Hanson, Mass for a private party.
Well, you just hit on a good point that this group practices, performs rather, all over New England.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've had a busy spring and summer, and after the feast, we're going to Newport on August 10th. I'm sorry, August 12th, and we're going to Lowell. We've got the Kale Fest in Fall River. We've got Grand Festas Holy Ghost Feast in Fall River at the end of August. So we've got a busy season coming up still.
Are most of these ethnic festivals that you're performing at?
Most of them, 95% of the things are all Holy Ghost or Portuguese feasts. Private. We've had a lot of private party calls, weddings.
Give our audience a profile as to the group. How many are in it, and what's the average person like?
The number of the group members is about 28, and they range from, I want to say, 15 or 16 to Mrs. Quintal over there, who's about 91 years old, going to be 92 this year. So it's a wide variety of people, and not just Maderans.
So, and they're here for every rehearsal.
Just about, yeah. I mean, people, you got to understand we're all volunteers and people work, and, you know, we have to work around other people's schedules. So it can be a challenge at times, but overall, everybody makes a big effort.
I'm going to ask you two more questions. Number one, you've been the director for a number of years, and I want to know what's the biggest reward that you have, and what's the biggest challenge you have?
The biggest reward is, to me, the people, and representing the group, having them have faith in me to be able to speak for them when we go somewhere. That means a lot to me. And the biggest challenge is, again, we're volunteers and trying to coordinate scheduling for basically practices. Performances, people always are there, but to practice it, it's a little harder.
Last thing, folks are going to be seeing this either during or after the feast. What can they expect?
We've got some surprises this year, so I can't tell you exactly what it is, but the group has worked hard over the past few years to recuperate the money that they spent to go to Madeira, but they've also added something new to our group, so don't miss the feast.
Mike, I know you're very busy, so we're going to let you go, but we're going to keep filming, and I'm sure the group will be good.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
One of the most visible signs the feast is coming is to see the arches of fragrant bayberry that line the route to the feast grounds go up, from the gateway arch on Acushnet Avenue down to the main gate on Madeira Avenue. The arches are similar to those found in Madeiran villages today. The bayberry is cut every year by committee and club members and their friends and family. Truckloads of the greens are brought from Gooseberry Island in nearby Westport to the main pavilion, where dozens of workers break the larger branches into smaller ones to be tied to the giant arches. Of course, lights and flags are added, and the arches are all up within a day or two.
Plug's on my end. Right here.
Plug on the other
Right
end?
here. Yeah. We're carrying it. Swing it around. Put the plug on that end. There.
My goodness.
Hi, Arthur. Hang it. That's it, Castle. Don't worry about that. That's it. I'm going back on the rest of the
Out there. We're in over here.
All right, come down.
Up down. Where's this go out, somebody? About a half an inch more. Right there, right there.
We're here on an evening just before the annual Feast of the Blessed Sacrament opens, and we're delighted to have Mrs. Madeline Betancourt with us, who goes way back with the feast. Madeline, tell us, what are some of your earliest memories of this feast?
I remember coming to this feast when I was between 7 and 8 years old. It was a big celebration, and we always got new clothes for the feast because you had to come with your Sunday best. I remember coming before the feast because my dad would be working on the grounds, so we always came down every night to be with the people that were putting the feast together.
Do you remember the feast before pavement and arches and all of that?
Yes, I do. I remember the feast when it started at the church. It was on the church yard, and they had like a little bar. It was a gazebo, and that was the bar. And women couldn't go in that gazebo, or children. It was just for the men. And they had what they called the clubhouse. That's where they used to teach CCD, and that's where they did all the cooking. And it was just a two-tenement house.
If we go back in time, do you remember what it was like when you first started coming to the feast?
Yes, I do. I was about 7, 8 years old. We used to come down every night while they were preparing for the feast. My grandfather and my father were on the committee, and I would come down with my mom and my sister, and we would just be there to see what they were doing and decorating the church, the front of the church. But at that time, the feast was held on the grounds of the church. And they had a little gazebo there, it was the bar for the beer. And children and women were not allowed to go in that gazebo. But I remember one day it started pouring, and we all went into the little gazebo to protect ourselves from the rain.
When you say we all went in, you're making it sound like there were 10 or 12 people.
Oh yes, there were a lot of people, more than 10 or 12. All the families would come before the feast, and we'd hang out and help whatever way we could. Even the children helped out. There was a house there, it was the clubhouse, and that's where they used to teach CCD, and that's where all the cooking went on. So you could go in the basement and help in whatever way you could, whatever the adults told you to do, that's what you would do. And I remember we would go home late because it was summertime, so we stayed down here late.
You've already answered one of the questions I had about food. Obviously, you prepared food, and I'd like you to compare the food back then to what it is now.
Well, of course, now they have a lot more food. But they had the traditional food, the Kammerspit, which is the beef. They had Favage, they had Tremors. They had soda in the bottle. You didn't have it in a glass or a paper cup. You had the whole bottle. And they used to put the bottles in this huge box full of ice. So if a customer came and wanted orange, you'd have to shuffle in through all that ice to find the flavor that they wanted.
Was it 1 day, 2 days, 3 days? How long did it last?
It was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday when it first began. Sunday was the parade and the mass, and Friday and Saturday. Saturday, they used to have fireworks every Saturday night.
When you say they had fireworks, where were the fireworks?
The fireworks were being shot up from Mars Bargain Land at that time, which is the old mills down by the Acushnet River.
Okay. Was there a religious aspect back then that we don't have today?
I think it was more religious than it is today for the fact that it was right close to the church. And all the proceeds were given to the church at that time.
We obsess about committees and festas and who's going to be on a committee, who's going to be the officers. Do you recall what it was like back then?
They didn't have as many committees, but I wouldn't have been involved in that. My dad would have been. But he always worked the beer stand. That was his job. And I don't remember what my grandfather did, but they didn't have all these committees. Everyone was involved.
Let's talk about your grandfather and your father. What were their names, and when were they involved?
My grandfather's name was João Quintal, and he was actually a chartered member of the SS Sacrament Club. They had 50 chartered members, and he was one of the members. He, where the pavilion stands now, there was like a rock formation there, and the older men would come down, and they had to take that down by hand. They didn't have any machinery.
You mean the rock?
The rock, that's what it was. We used, as kids, we called it the mountain, but every night they would come to break down that rock so that they could have the pavilion.
And the pavilion dates back to what year?
I really can't recall the year.
And what about your dad?
My dad served in 1950. Did they have the pavilion? I don't think they had the pavilion yet at 1950. I'm not sure, but my dad did donate the stone that stands on the corner of the grounds for the founding fathers. I remember when they had that dedication.
And your dad's name was?
My dad's name was Joseph Vieira.
Okay.
And he was from Madeira. He was born in Madeira. He was from Pelé Freire, which is way up in the mountains. He came to this country when he was 23 years old.
Now, you have seen this feast grow from a few hundred people to many, many thousands of people. What goes through your mind as we wind down to the opening days of the feast?
It's just a big celebration that I look forward to every year since I was a child. It's part of our heritage, and I hope it just continues for another 100 years.
Family. Basically, that's what you're saying.
It's all about family, and back when I was a child, more so than today. I remember the bands competing against each other, and we'd be there for beyond midnight with the bands. It was just a lot of fun. It was all about family, more so than it is today. But I think they're just trying to get back to that.
I see a lot of families gathering in the grape arbor to have a Kanspit dinner on a Sunday. Mm-hmm. And I look back at 1955, remembering when I was selling ice cream out of the back of a Ponyboy ice cream truck out on the street. But there was no pavilion, you're right, in 55. So that had to have come after that. What about the future? What do you see coming up for the 100th anniversary?
I think it's going to be spectacular. They've been planning for it about a year now. So by the time it comes around, they're going to have a lot of plans that will come true.
And what will Madeline Betancourt be doing?
Well, Madeline Betancourt does the malasada stand. My mother-in-law was born in Santa Cruz. Therefore, my father-in-law was not Madeiran. So my husband became a fish aide in 1998 when they allowed sons of Madeiran mothers to become committee members. And my husband continues to do malasadas in his mother's memory. We've been doing that for 14 years.
And we all thank him and we all remember him for it. Madeline, I want to thank you for being with us today. And do you have any ending thoughts? Do you have any last thoughts to tell our viewing audience?
Just come to our feast and you will really have a great time. It's all about family.
No one will argue that the food served at the feast is one of its top attractions. Most of it is cooked in giant pots and ovens in the main kitchen. But linguiça sausage, malasadas, and some beef is cooked in the various barracas or food stands. The shopping list for the feast includes 10,000 pounds of choice beef, 4,000 pounds of pork, 1.5 tons of linguiça, 3,500 dozen of sandwich rolls, and much, much more. A staff of cooks starts the prep work a week in advance, and the cooking begins in earnest in advance of the feast opening. We're here after the feast, 3 weeks after the feast, with Mr. Lou Texera, the president of the 2012 feast. And Lou, I want to ask you your memories of the very first feast that you remember.
Wow, that was quite a few years ago. Yeah, I've always come to the feast with my mother and father. My mother and father both worked here all the time. Mainly because my grandfather on my mother's side is one of the original founders, Manny Catino. So we would come, obviously, the whole week of the feast preparing, and the week after the feast is helping clean up and stuff. But I had to be like 8, 9 years old when I remember, actually can remember it.
Did you have a job?
Cleaning the barracas. And back then the barracas were made of chicken wire and the berry bush was all around and stuff like that.
Like they were in the old country?
Yes, yeah. And I remember working in the stands and they had big coolers full with ice water and you'd have to get the bottles of soda for people who wanted it. And by the end of the night, you couldn't feel your hands. So you'd take a break, go to the carnival for a while and then come back. But yeah, always enjoyed coming here.
What do you remember about the entertainment years ago? What was it like?
I remember the big band, the band contests.
Battle of the Bands.
Battle of the Bands. I remember that a lot, quite a bit. And that's about all I remember. You know, it wasn't not my type of entertainment other than the folklore group. You know, I was a kid. But I do remember the Battle of the Bands, and it was interesting.
So we've gone through all these years, and now all of a sudden it's 2012, and you find yourself being elected as president of the feast. Obvious question, what did it feel like?
It felt great. It felt great. It really, really did. I always wanted to be president of the feast, obviously, but it was important to me for my parents. It was something that I did for myself, but for my family, my heritage, my mother and father. I've got 6 brothers and sisters, and they're getting involved more and more now. But I think when I became president of the feast this year, it really kind of hit home with them that they should be getting involved, like I have been. When they grew older, as I did, you kind of shy away from going to the feast because you've been here all the time. But when you get older, things change. You become more mature. Heritage means more to you. Family. I come to the feast or just come to the feast grounds while they're working, and I always hear stories about my mother and father that I haven't heard before. Nice stories, you know, and it brings back very, very good memories.
They say that the feast has changed focus, and that many years ago it was almost purely religious, and now it's not that way anymore.
It probably has changed somewhat, but in a good way. We're giving away a lot of money now to different charities. We're becoming a lot more community-oriented. This year, we have vendor spaces that we rent out. We donated 10 vendor spaces to different charities, nonprofit organizations, and you know, I hope that's a trend that we're going to continue. And also this year, the foster program of the Greater New Bedford area, we had approximately 150 foster children and their foster parents come down on Saturday afternoon, and everything was free, including the carnival. And they were very, very grateful. And it was the right thing to do. And that is another thing I think we're going to continue year after year. And I've gone before the board of directors that we're going to start another committee. It would be community service. We have this beautiful facility here, and we use it 4 days out of the year for a feast. We should be using it more, and for different organizations, strictly nonprofit, or for helping the community. And I'm sure we're going to be moving forward a lot more with that. And like I said, yeah, we have strayed a little bit maybe from the religious aspect, but we haven't from the community aspect. We definitely going to, but there for the community, and we're going to continue.
Talk to us about your committee. How many were there, and where were they from?
Well, it was a big, big committee. I think we ended up with 68 members. They came from all over, mostly around here, obviously, but Connecticut, California, Georgia, I think, Kentucky, and obviously they loved, you know, they hadn't been here in years, and it was very, very good. I had a very good committee, and they put on a heck of a feast, I think.
Looking back at it, what's the number one thing you're going to remember about this? Pride that I did it, that I, you know, every time I came to the feast grounds, I remember my parents, and you know, I'm glad I did it. You know, a sense of satisfaction. Okay, and this is just the beginning.
you come here and, like I said, once you're a member of this club, I've said it before and I'll say it again, your family tree becomes a forest, because these are all brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts. Everybody's family here.
They say that the feast is the signature event of New Bedford summer, and certainly if you're to judge by numbers, that seems to be correct, because we had 4 wonderful days of weather.
Absolutely, yes, yes.
Because the feast is a weather-dependent event.
Right,
And,
right.
you know, no one wants to go to the feast when it's raining.
No.
The food at the feast this year, what did you do differently than in past years?
This year we actually had meat frite, which is cornmeal, and it's fried. It's delicious, and it's kind of a staple of a Portuguese meal. We also had barbecue chicken, which was something new we tried. That went over very well. We had also the obvious conchspit and the malasadas, the goat, the rabbit, the list goes, linguiça, of course. I don't know how I missed that. But we also had frozen drinks, fruit cups, and imported beer section. So there's quite a variety of food. You know, but obviously, the Portuguese food goes a lot quicker, and we sell volumes and volumes of that. But it's nice to have variety, and you could tell because people bought them.
You and your committee served for 12 full months.
Yes.
Now those months have passed by. Talk to me about what's happening now and for the next couple of months.
Yeah. Well, now we're just paying bills. Obviously, it costs a lot of money to put on this feast, a lot of money. So that's exactly what we're doing now, is just paying all the bills. Once all the bills are paid, we know how much money we have left over. And obviously we have to give a certain amount back to the club, because you know it costs money. Even though it's only 4 days of the feast, this club is open. You know, there's expenses all year long. So we make sure we have enough money to give to the club. But then we have donations, and that's a very important part. And the feast was successful this year, and it's going to show in our donations. Obviously, we're going to give out more money to different organizations and nonprofits. And 99% of them are all local. So the money's going to stay in the community.
I know you're busy, and I know there are other places you have to be, but do you have anything in closing that you'd like to say?
Well, just that I loved being the president of the feast this year. I had a great committee. We never argued. It was just, you know, everybody has an opinion, and we learned to get along very well. And we have obviously some members of the committee, it's their first time, and I bet you 99% of them are going to stay. And that means a lot. It means a lot because, you know, this is a large club. There's 300 plus members, but you can never have too many members, you know, and it's like you can't have too many friends.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.